From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
The image of FBI agents hauling mobsters into court is outdated. Federal investigators are just as likely to be hunting down crooks and terrorists in the dark corners of the internet as on the streets. National security takes up most of their bandwidth, but what are the priorities of the Rhode Island U.S. Attorney and the region's FBI office? This week on Newsmakers, U.S. Attorney for the District of Rhode Island, Aaron Weisman, and Special Agent in charge of the FBI Boston office, Joseph Bonavolonta. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the program, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the program. It's good to have you both here. And I want to make a note before we get going. If you're at home watching this program and wondering why Ted and I aren't asking questions about ongoing cases like Operation Varsity Blues or the criminal investigation into the Fall River mayor, it's because these guys won't say anything about it, so we don't want to waste our time on a no comment unless either of you want to break some news right now on an ongoing investigation.
We'll take it.
I think you got it right.
All right. Well, the show is called Newsmakers after all, so we like to make news when we can. Special Agent in charge, Bonavolonta, we're going to start with you so people understand your office in Boston covers 4 states, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and here in Rhode Island. When you think back about the cases you were handling 10 years ago and to now, what is the single biggest type of case that has emerged that has drawn a larger chunk of your office's resources?
Well, I don't think it can be narrowed down to really one single type of case, but what I will say is that national security has really continued to rise to the forefront. And when I say national security, I'm talking about counterterrorism, counterintelligence, which has really risen dramatically as far as the level of focus and the level of which we're talking about it, and as well as cyber. Those really are 3 areas that have always been at the top level of the FBI's priorities, but it's really just been enhanced over the last several years.
And how is it enhanced? It seems to me that, look, you made the round with reporters here in Rhode Island recently. I was one of them. And there seems to be there's more outreach from the FBI, not only publicly, but to corporations and companies. Are you guys changing your approach when it comes to combating these areas?
We have that approach over the last few years has evolved, and under the national security realm, when you look at counterintelligence and cyber, we've been much more aggressive and proactive in our outreach to private sector companies, academia as well. And the reason for that, and we're here in Rhode Island, it's a very target-rich environment. When you have high-end, world-renowned research and development universities, and when you have many private sector institutions, such as many Fortune 500 and 100 companies, by nature, those entities are targets for foreign adversaries to steal trade secrets, technology, business proprietary information, among other things as well.
The War College in Newport must be on that list.
And the Naval War College in Newport is another entity as well. And we have Woods Hole, somewhat in our backyard here in southeastern Massachusetts. So at the end of the day, it's a very target-rich environment, and that's why the counterintelligence threat really is right at the top rung, and we spend a lot of time and effort in doing that proactive outreach.
I know we want to bring in the U.S. Attorney, but just one other question on that. Do you find that these large institutions, do they understand the level of the threat they're facing, or do you find when you're being brought in, you get to some of these places and say, guys, you're not prepared for the threats you're now facing in 2019?
Sure, it's a little bit of both, and that's why that outreach is so important. I will say, however, that really in the last couple of years, I have seen a dramatic turn in the outreach that we've done. When we have provided defensive threat briefings to many of these entities, it appears that people are much more educated with respect to the threat, and they're much more prone to engage with us as well.
U.S. Attorney Aaron Weisman, I guess the same question to you. I have to, note that you came from the state attorney general's office. You worked under 4 different attorneys general, 5, but who's counting? So now,
who was your favorite?
Yeah, right. All right, and then you move over to the U.S. Attorney's office, I believe, in January. But I figure you have a sense as to the cases that have emerged as, greater or higher in volume. What are you seeing now, or what is the office seeing now?
Well, we're seeing a lot of priorities, which are actually human trafficking is a big priority for the office. We're bringing people aboard, more resources from the department so we can address that. Opioids is a very big focus. Obviously, all the deaths that we've seen in Rhode Island over the last numbers of years, we're very focused not on just outreach, but on prosecuting those individuals who are bringing that poison into our communities. And we see a lot of cyber fraud as well, particularly with the elderly who are being taken advantage of. And we've stood up a prosecutor, a number of prosecutors actually, who are engaged, again, not just in outreach, but in prosecuting transnational criminal organizations that are stealing people's money.
You know, there are regional priorities, a lot of them that you just rattled off, and then there are directives from the U.S. Department of Justice and Attorney General William Barr. What are the priorities coming down from on high right now?
Well, those are the priorities. I mean, we've had the directives that human trafficking is a priority. Of course, terrorism is always and has been and continues to be both international terrorism and domestic terrorism is a priority. Of course, we protect people's civil and constitutional rights. We have a prosecutor and we have somebody in our civil division that does outreach and makes sure that the community knows about any violations of their civil rights.
Aaron, as Tim noted, 5 attorneys general. We have our number right. So it's interesting to me because right now you have the newly elected state attorney general is a former U.S. attorney, Peter Nerona, who just moved over after a number of years in the office you now hold. And now the new U.S. attorney, you, are someone who spent years and years in the state attorney general's office. Those offices have always collaborated, but do you think, will it make a difference that the U.S. attorney and the state attorney general also know pretty intimately the capabilities and the statutory abilities of the other office? Will it give you more ability to do more with investigations?
Well, sure. I think it's a big advantage, of course, that Peter and I have worked together for so long. Of course, he was over at the state, right, for many years prior to becoming assistant U.S. attorney and before he assumed the role of United States attorney. So I think our friendship and our collaboration, I think, is important because we all, at the end of the day, have the same goal, which is to enforce the laws to reduce crime in our communities. And I think that collaboration, which we work on very closely, furthers those goals.
Joe, I want to ask you about James Comey. It was a stunning moment when the former FBI director went to Congress right before the elections to provide an update on the Hillary Clinton email probe. And many people, including Clinton, felt by him speaking publicly about the ongoing investigation, it cost her the election. Look, at the top of the show, I made a note that you couldn't comment about any ongoing investigations, but here was the director doing just that down in Washington, D.C. You're a career FBI agent. Did Comey's actions surprise you?
Well, that specifically, I'm not going to comment on that. What I will comment on is, since I've been in the FBI, similar to my colleague, the U.S. attorneys, I've served under a total of 5 FBI directors, and the overwhelming majority of my time in the FBI has been spent in the field. And as such, the interaction at the director level, for obvious reasons in such a large organization has been limited. So, I'm not going to comment on anything that would be opinion related on that matter. But I will say that anything that I had ever needed, either as an investigative case agent or since I've been in leadership positions in the FBI from headquarters, as far as support or resources that we needed to combat the threats, I've always received.
But do you feel the agency is loosening a little bit in terms of being able to, when we talked about community outreach, but also public comment? Again, I noted that you'd done a series of interviews here. Do you feel that sort of Kremlin-like structure, for maybe a bad analogy, of 20 years ago where everything was buttoned down, that's starting to loosen a little bit?
Well, I know that over the course of the last several years, we have become very much more proactive in our outreach. Not only, we talked about private and public sector a little bit earlier, but with the media as well. And there's a specific reason for that, is when you look at the threats that we're faced with, whether it's the national security threats or the criminal threats, the opioid epidemic, the gang issue that we're facing as well. It's not good enough anymore to just have a whole of government approach, which means agencies working together. It's a whole of society approach, and for that very reason, it's incredibly helpful to use platforms such as this to talk about what are the threats, what is the kind of assistance and help that we can be getting from the public, and what can the public and what should the public expect of us as well. So it's really transformed when you look at how all of these major threats have evolved from more of a whole of government approach to a whole of society approach. And that's exactly why it's been very effective conducting the outreach that we have.
I know, Joe, this is the sensitive set of topics, but I do have to ask along the same lines. You had the Hillary Clinton investigation, all the controversy around that. Then you've had the investigations involving the president's campaign, all the controversy around that. I mean, what has that done to morale out in the field? And I know so much of that has been in Washington around the director's office, but has it affected morale for the the rank and file out in the field offices like your own?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's actually something that Tim and I have spoken about a couple weeks ago when we met. Morale in the FBI is very good, and I'm even gonna focus it a little bit more to the Boston division. As you know, it's one of the largest divisions in the country. And morale is extremely high, and I say that because as the head of the FBI office, I am constantly out in all of the 4 states that we oversee, conducting presentations, providing remarks at various conferences, engaging with the community at community outreach efforts, and I have yet to have a single instance where a member of the community or state, local, or federal partners have in any way said anything negative. It's been quite the opposite. It's very positive because of the impact that the individuals that make up the Boston division of the FBI have had among the various threats that we're talking about today.
Aaron, you brought up the human trafficking cases, and certainly anecdotally from a journalist perspective, we are doing more and more stories on human trafficking because you are prosecuting more and more of those cases. And it made me wonder if that's because, in fact, there is more human trafficking going on, or because you guys are bringing more cases forward. Which one is it?
It might be both. I mean, I think it's more along the lines of what Joe was talking about, into the community and awareness. If you see something, say something. I think because of the outreach that's immediate, like you, the good work you do, and you get out there, people see something and it doesn't look right, whether it's a young person at a motel, and they may make a phone call. So there's more awareness, and certainly with the technology out there, there is, I think, more human trafficking going on. And when I was with the state, we had a number of cases where the human trafficking tended to congregate on a site called Backpage, and of course that was closed down through some civil and criminal prosecutions. So it's more out there now technologically in various forums, which can be potentially harder to find.
We see this just this week. There's been this huge amount of attention on the Epstein case out of New York, which does have a trafficking element. When I think often people think of trafficking as people from other countries, and maybe it's all but that is more. That's allegedly a very wealthy individual who sort of had the means to get young girls, again, allegedly into his orbit. Does that seem like an unusual version of trafficking, or is that sort of part of what you're seeing in your work?
Well, we haven't seen, obviously, a case like that here, but you do typically see young people, teenagers, and young women a little older than teenagers that, for various reasons, are in fact trafficked.
All right, we're going to take a break here on Newsmakers. Our guests this week are U.S. Attorney for Rhode Island, Aaron Weisman, and the Special Agent in charge of the FBI Boston office, Joseph Bonavolonta. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, Eyewitness News reporter Ted Nesi. Our guests this week are Special Agent in charge of the Boston office of the FBI, Joseph Bonavolonta, and the U.S. Attorney for Rhode Island, Aaron Weisman. Joe, if I don't ask you an organized crime question, people are going to think that I've gotten sick or something. It's obviously a topic that I report a lot on, but it struck me 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I interviewed you at the Providence office of the FBI. I asked you about the state of the mob in New England, and in your answer, you quickly shifted to the priorities of the FBI, which we talked about at the top of the show. Are people to take from that, when they hear that answer, which we put on our website, that La Cosa Nostra is really not an area of focus for the FBI now?
No, I wouldn't say it's not an area of focus. When we spoke a couple weeks ago, what I wanted to be very clear on is that LCN writ large as a threat, when you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, that's really when it was still a top priority in the FBI, and for very good reason, because of the tentacles that some of the major organized crime families had in virtually every industry. I think through the use of sophisticated techniques and the use of the RICO statute and the enterprise theory of investigation, we did a very effective job of significantly disrupting the stranglehold that the LCN had in many of those industries. It does not mean that it's no longer a threat, but when we spoke a couple weeks ago, the reason why we continued to talk about the national security threats, the cyber threats, the opioid epidemic, and the gang threats is because over the past several years, those have been the threats that have really continued to evolve and have really been at the forefront.
On LCN, I sometimes say to Tim, I'm surprised because he'll be talking about this big mob case coming up, and then the defendant is wheeled out on oxygen in a gurney because so many of the big players have gotten so old. Do you see a replenishing of the ranks of LCN? Are there, younger, aggressive the kind of people we picture from the heyday of the mob around here, or is it sort of dying off as literally the famous figures of LCN die off?
Well, the LCN still exists, and as has been noted in some pretty recent cases, even within the last couple of years in our region here, it still exists. There still is a threat, and as that threat still exists, we will and do devote resources to it. And a classic example is obviously the Frank Salemi case, because we received information, and that information was pertaining to a cold case homicide that had gone unsolved until recently.
Stephen DeSar.
And for obvious reasons, there's family members that are victims for decades that want closure on these matters. And obviously, if any information were ever to come forth, we will work it very effectively with our partners in the U.S. Attorney's offices as we did, and we will continue to move forward.
All right, a final question on this, so we can make it real quick, but I think it's important for you to answer it. When I do a story on organized crime, my phone will inevitably ring, and it'll be somebody who says the streets were safer when so-and-so ran the show, meaning a mob boss in New England. And they will add that, they didn't get involved in narcotics. They weren't involved in drugs, which is a sort of a narrative that is perpetuated by The Godfather or whatever it might be. True or false, LCN was involved in the drug trade?
True. The LCN has always been involved in the drug trade, and I spent the first many years of my career in New York working LCN cases, and I can tell you, and a lot of it has to do with the way that pop culture and the narrative, with respect to some of the movies that you just mentioned, or some of the TV shows, and how they portray these individuals. And I have spent a significant amount of my career sitting right next to many of these very high-level individuals of organized crime families, and that whole notion of honor, is just, it's untrue. These individuals lived and continue to live by one code, and that's basically money and power, money ruling all. And when they wake up in the morning every single day, the only thing on their minds is how can they make more money. And so the whole notion of honor and a lot of the ways that these individuals have been portrayed throughout various movies and TV shows, it isn't the real deal, and that's why they were such, and they still continue to be in some cases, a pervasive problem.
Aaron, if the mob is one part of law enforcement, everyone around thinks about another, is public corruption. That was a major focus for your predecessor, Peter Nerona, when he was U.S. Attorney. There were a lot of high-profile cases that the U.S. Attorney's Office was involved in. Is it fair to say that will continue to be something the U.S. Attorney's Office spends a lot of time on? Do you still, get a lot of tips related to that? Is it something you're still having to put significant resources into?
We care a lot about public corruption, and like my predecessor, we'll continue to do that. I can't speak about pending cases or pending investigations, but yes, 100% public corruption is something that we're always on the lookout for.
And you've had a long career on the state side, now on the federal side on this. Sometimes when we would have the former U.S. attorney on and he'd have one of those big cases, we'd say, but is there any deterrent effect? Because there's one of these cases, it feels like every couple of years. Do you think, has there been an effect from so many high-profile public corruption cases in around recent decades, or is it just certain people who get elected office, no matter what, no matter how many times you prosecute, are going to keep, going in the cookie jar?
That's a good question. I think there might be a deterrent effect over time. Maybe the arc does bend, and over time people do get the message. But, human nature as it is, sometimes with power comes temptation, and some people fall to that.
Is it harder if you have to investigate someone at a very high level versus, some rural town councilman who, doesn't have powerful friends or big time defense lawyers, versus if you have to do an investigation that touches on some of the most powerful people in the state?
It might be harder, but we'll devote the resources that we need to investigate anybody in any position of power.
Is it outsized in Rhode Island? You know, the people who live in Rhode Island think that corruption is worse here than anywhere else.
I'm not sure if that's true. I have no knowledge if that's true or not. I mean, we're obviously focused on what goes on here. Speaking to my colleagues around the country, sometimes you'll hear, oh, public corruption is worse and you can fill in the blank. In West Virginia or wherever they might, I don't want to pick on West Virginia, but, you know, so I'm not sure, but we're certainly focused on public corruption here in Rhode Island.
And just to elaborate on that is we're in sync with that, where nationwide with the FBI, public corruption still remains the top criminal program priority that we work for obvious reasons that were just stated. And as far as the question about are any states worse than the other, we don't look at it that way. We look at it like the pervasive threat that it is to that respective state, and it's corruption is corruption. And if we hear about it and we see it, we will investigate it and move forward.
Well, you worked in New York, so you've been in like the World Series of political corruption perhaps in your career. Aaron, you were appointed by President Trump. With the support of Senators Reid and Whitehouse. You know that the president is a polarizing figure, including in Rhode Island, which is not one of his stronger states. Was there any pressure put on you, by the way? Did you in any way feel you had to agree to do certain things to get this job, or was it the process?
It was a very transparent process.
Walk us through, like, how did you find out you were in the running? How did you,
Well, I'd expressed interest in it, and I did, of course. I had a relationship with Senator Whitehouse. I had worked with him. I was his criminal appeals chief back at the Attorney General's office, and I had a very good working relationship with Senator Whitehouse, and I think that helped. But the process was a very transparent one.
Joe, foreign intervention in elections was thrust into the spotlight in 2016. Looking ahead to 2020, you talk to any political scientist, that is expected to be a heck of a day at the polls in an intense campaign season. How can the FBI be a part of preventing that kind of interference from Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, whatever it might be? Do we need stronger laws, and do you think the FBI has the tools it needs?
Well, if you go back to even prior to the 2018 midterm elections that we got through, the FBI actually created under Director Wray the Foreign Influence Task Force, which was an FBI-led multi-agency task force, which was focused on doing just that, to look specifically at foreign influence operations conducted by foreign adversaries, specifically targeted to undermine the midterm elections at the time. And there was several prongs to that task force, active investigations and operations being one of them, but also effective outreach, once again, through private sector and social media companies as well. So there's already a task force in place, and I want to be very clear, it's also a multi-agency task force as well. So moving into 2020, that task force will once again continue to be very effective as it was prior to the 2018 midterm elections.
My impression, though, is the FBI, this is an uphill battle because look at Facebook, you have fake news, maybe a fake news story coming up on there. You're seeing more and more of altered images that are making their way into Facebook feeds. And if that's coming from outside of this country, what can the FBI do to combat that kind of misinformation, if anything at all? Is it really we need to rely on Facebook and we need to rely on Google and all those companies to take care of it?
Well, what the rationale behind it is just to make sure that there are effective engagement with the social media companies. And I want to be very clear that when it comes to content, that is not in any way anything that the FBI has been, nor should they be involved in at all.
It's a slippery slope with First Amendment stuff.
It's a First Amendment issue.
Okay.
However, but when it comes with engaging with the social media companies, what can be done and what has been done is providing things like threat indicators that could be emanating from overseas. And then at the end of the day, it's up to the social media companies to do a review of what those threat indicators are and to use their own internal practices to determine what could potentially be foreign influence and what isn't.
We are running short on time, so I'll keep this one quick. But Aaron, you've been in this world of prosecutions a long time. You can't talk about open cases, but you can talk about closed ones. What's the most memorable case you've worked on in your career?
Oh, goodness. Almost 28 years at the Attorney General's office. Of course, we had the prosecution of former Governor Dupree. That was a very memorable case. But I think the most gratifying cases for ones were violent, were individuals who were victims of violent crime were able to get the justice that they deserved. So many cases where, you know, people and their families had been murdered or harmed in such a significant way, and were able to see to it that justice was achieved for those individuals.
So 20 seconds, most memorable case.
It would have to be the case that we alluded to a little bit earlier, which was I was part of a team working against the Bonanno LCN family in New York over a period of about 7 years, and we severely disrupted that family and wound up indicting well over 90 maid members and associates, including the entire leadership hierarchy of that family. And that was a very rewarding case because of the impact you know, that entire organized crime family not only had throughout the New York region, but really throughout the country and internationally.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. We'll see you next week on
Thank you.
Newsmakers.
Thank you.